Ramona, why do you think emotional intelligence is still so rare? And what are the biggest misconceptions people have about what it actually means?
That's actually a very tough question because I think that this is something that needs to be seen in a societal context, right? What are skills that we as a society value very much on the one hand side? And I think that in the past, being very rational has been something that was really considered the ideal setup, I want to say, right? And I think that has probably multiple reasons. And one of them being that sometimes it can also be hard being emotionally intelligent because being emotionally intelligent doesn't mean that you're not hurt, that you're not angry, that you're not sad, right? But that you're okay with feeling your feelings as well, right? And know how to deal with them, also ideally well. But you still have to have those feelings, go through those feelings, and not push them aside. And I think that sometimes it's simply easier to push emotions aside. And I always like the picture. So, one of my trainers in my coaching education, she usually says that if you push feelings aside, they go down into the basement and they have a gym there and they start to work out and then they just come back stronger. And this is, I think, a picture that very clearly shows why emotional intelligence is so important, because ideally you deal with them while they haven't gone to the gym just yet, right? Because then it's easier. But since we grow up, at least I grew up in a society where there was a lot of narrative around you got to be strong, you don't cry in front of others, and you cannot show anger, maybe necessarily as well, right? I think there are also differences, cultural differences. In terms of upbringing and socialization, I also think that there are gender differences in this, right? I think that the narrative that is being told to young girls is very different from the narrative that is told to young boys. Um, and I think, therefore, we first need to understand that all of us, we have all emotions and the full range. And then also see how do we move away from these potential stereotypes as well, right? That boys don't cry, or women have to be very placid, I want to say, and just encompass that we all have everything. And then how do we also deal with that? It means that we need to overcome prejudices that we have, biases that we have. Um, and only then we can really incorporate it more, because in the end, it's if we are aware that this is just a full range of human experience that we have, um, and we accept that, and we accept that this is something fundamental to also our human nature, right? That you cannot just push it away. Then maybe at some point we will realize the importance it has for us to also live together in a positive way, right? I mean, one of the biggest challenges right now also is that we are in very many countries moving away from a very human perspective, um, going more and more towards mainstream, let's say, disregarding the diversity that we have, and not understanding that each and every person is different. And one thing that kind of unites us is that emotions are a human experience, and that we then should, in this area, just look more for our commonalities, and then hopefully at some point understand that it's better to learn how to make emotions our friends, all the full range of emotions, right? Not that we're just happy about being happy, but that we're also okay with being sad, and learn to deal with our emotions in a way that they do not go to the gym.
Hmm. First of all, I love that metaphor of if you push your emotions away, they're just going to get stronger, which I guess if you are someone who has done it for decades, then you cannot even imagine open that Pandora's box or even open that basement's door because it's going to be very violent. It would be very, very hard for you to manage or understanding or even processing emotions that have been there for 20, 30, 40, maybe 50 years, depending on how old you are. Yeah, I find this fascinating and interesting because one thing that you were saying that we're well, I think we're as a society we're stopped. Well, you said a couple of things. One, how we grow up in an environment or in a culture in a society that we have to be more rational, that boys cannot cry and girls cannot be angry, that girls are more emotional than men or than boys, even though if you're angry all the time, that's being emotional as well. So it's just like, it's how do we, is the definition in how society gives to being emotional. If you cry, you are emotional. If you're angry, you're not. It's like, well, they're both emotions anyway. But I think yes, even when you said how we stop looking for commonalities and what makes us similar, I think that that is even part of emotional intelligence of having that empathy, that having that understanding of okay, maybe I don't know Ramona's background, maybe I don't know what she's going through, but can I try to see the world with her lens? Can I try to find a common ground? Can I try to leave put my ego aside, and by ego I mean my protector, anything that triggers me. If you say something that might go against my belief or might be different from my belief, I right away to feel attacked because I don't see the difference between you having a different opinion from me being attacked, because now I feel that nowadays a lot of people are triggered very, very easily, and instead of taking a step back and realize, wait, what is going on here? Is it, did she really mean that? Or is something about me that is a fear, insecurity, or self-doubt that I have that I haven't been aware of that now is come to light and then I have to process it. I think that because I think the disconnection in society even more so nowadays, you can blame social media, you can blame an individualistic society as a whole. What I think is the lack of curiosity and understanding of why we feel the way we feel. Why do you think that's the case? And how come it seems to me that we got worse over time.
Mm. So why is that the case? Probably has very different reasons for different people. I My personal experience is that sometimes it's hard to put yourself in someone else's shoes if you've never walked that, right? If I talk to someone who has grown up in a very privileged situation and share maybe challenges that, in my case, I experienced due to the fact that I'm a woman or that I come from a less privileged socioeconomic background, then very often it's also creating an aha effect. And I think what would be needed there is that we just share genuinely about our realities, but then also stay curious about the realities of others. And I think one fundamental thing for me here is to understand that no matter if another person has a different perspective, they're still a human being worth of, or who's worth something, right? Independent of who they are. And they're okay as they are. And also, but that is also something that I believe. I'm not on this world to change people, right? Everyone has to figure out their own path in a sense. And I think there, what I would wish for is just more curiosity that, from my perspective, is being washed away due to confirmation bias. Very often you look for something that you already know and believe, and you will find reassurances of your belief everywhere if you want to. I mean, that's also a question of how much do you engage with people who have different views than yourself. I found it very interesting in trainings. I sometimes like to do an exercise where people have to write down their 10 closest friends and then look for anything they have in common and anything where they are different. And very often you will realize that friend circles are very similar. And the question is, how much can you put yourself into the shoes of someone else if you've never heard a different story? And if you're now, I mean, there also, you said, yeah, you can blame social media. And to be honest, of course you can, right? Because if you put something out there, then the algorithms are usually trained to show you exactly the same thing again and again and again. Confirmation bias, right? You see what you anyways believe, and it reaffirms your belief. And the more your belief gets reaffirmed, the harder it is then to step out of that and realize that there is also a different perspective to life. And there, I think it's just, yeah, really important to maybe every once in a while, on purpose, go out into the world, meet someone that is totally different from yourself, and just strike up an open conversation. Like, what's difficult for them? What hurdles did they have to overcome? How did they do it? Why do they view the world the way that they do, right? And then you will again realize that very often there is also a common ground in terms of emotions, because even if you have a very different worldview, like, everyone has been afraid at some point in their life. I don't think anyone out there has never been afraid. And then, of course, like, I, for example, cannot imagine what people have been going through who, for example, fled from war, because I have never been in a war. And while I might be afraid that this might come to Europe sometime again, it's not an imminent danger. So I have no clue what that is like. But I do know what it's like to be afraid. And that is something where you can also connect, and where then you can show empathy, right? Because even if I can't put myself in the shoes of the other person, I can still say, hey, I get why you're afraid. And it's also okay to be afraid in these situations, and then see if there is also anything that helps that person to maybe be less afraid, right? And this is how you also build up human connection. And if you then realize, hey, we have something in common here, then maybe you can also figure out where you have other things in common.
Hmm. One thing that I've been kind of, I wouldn't say it afraid of, more maybe concerned a tiny bit, is to get caught up in an echo chamber of opinions. To me, I'm always looking, it's like, wait, am I just, I've been, have I been exposed to just confirmation bias? Something that I try to talk to different people that have different ideologies and belief, because I know that what seems to be correct or right for me might not be. There's a lot of room for nuances, which I don't think people are willing to consider that much. It's either black or white. And I love what you said about how when you evaluate your environment, or at least when you have trained people and ask what their group of friends look like, or what their beliefs are, what their ideologies are, they're very, very similar. One thing I've found out is through conversation I have with people, because I'm a very curious person, is that I try to maybe not challenge, but trying to hear other people's perspective. And the moment that they realize or they feel that I have a different opinion than theirs, they just start pushing back, even though I'm just trying to understand more. I think inside of us, at least for like people who haven't figured out their emotions quite well, is if you have a different opinion than me, that means that maybe I'm wrong, and I don't want to be wrong. That goes against my self-worth. And I think that is just very, seems like there's not enough awareness for people. To me, I've said to many friends or even acquaintances, hey, it's okay that we disagree. We see the world with a different lens. We have different backgrounds, we have different upbringings, we have different experiences. It is okay, and it's understandable that we see the world in a different way. That doesn't make you right. That doesn't make me right. We can be both be right and wrong at the same time. And it's, to me, what I'm trying to have through this conversation, whether on the podcast or out and about, is maybe try to help people to see the nuances in every topic, in every conversation. But one thing I wanted to ask you, because I feel that this is something that might be key for people to understand. I've been sort of obsessed with understanding concepts like procrastination, narcissism, burnout. Is we sort of know what that means, but we truly, it's hard for us to attach behaviors to that, because to me, once we have a clear concept of the behaviors associated with something, then it's easier for us to embody that and become better. What would you say are the behaviors or some of the behaviors associated with someone with high emotional intelligence?
Mhm. I think that that can be exhibited also very differently, right? I wouldn't say that there is this set of behaviors and then you're emotionally intelligent, because that also depends on your personality. I think what helps me be as much emotionally intelligent as I am, but also hopefully improve, is really being curious, because that's how you learn. And I like what you said, right? You said you can be wrong, and you don't want to be living in the perception or in the knowledge that there is something that you're wrong about, but you'd rather expand your horizon and then get a better perspective, right? And maybe adjust your perspective. And I think this is something that not many people do. How many people in your life have you met that would openly say, oh, I was wrong there. Now, I changed my perspective on that. I know very few people that would openly, particularly in a conversation. And this is also where I think sometimes it's important to step out of a conversation if you see that the opinions are clashing very much, to give both parties also the time to reflect on what has been said. And then maybe something does change based on the conversation, but also not many people are really happy about saying, oh, I was wrong and I changed my opinion based on that. Probably there are many reasons for that. But I think if you can really do that, and if you can say, hey, I'm willing to be proven wrong, and then not only say that, but also your actions follow up on that, then also that is a good step towards emotional intelligence, right? Because in the end, it's good to assume that your experience is different from someone else's, and to be aware of that. And by trying to understand where someone else is coming from, and maybe realizing that your worldview could be adjusted there, could be expanded there, that's a really good step, right? Because in the end, I'm also sometimes wondering, is there really such a thing as someone who's like 100% emotionally intelligent? Highly doubt that, right? Because um, you'll always have a certain landscape in your mind, a certain horizon that can always be expanded. And I'm not sure if there is even a state in which you're so completely enlightened. Maybe that's also a philosophical or religious question then. But since I'm not a particularly religious person, not the best person to answer that then. Yeah.
You know, I, I might sound like a broken record because I've said this many times on the podcast, right? Doesn't matter who I talk to, Ramona. Seriously, it doesn't matter the topic. It doesn't matter what it's dating, relationships, procrastination, burnout, anything. It seems to me, or the common answer is that most things, if not almost everything, can be solved or quote unquote cured by being more curious. Curiosity is such a superpower in terms of for us having a better understanding, but also curiosity in a non-judgmental way. Let me really try to understand not only other people, but ourselves. And it's funny how you said how there's only few people that are open and willing to say that they're wrong and change their opinion about it. And I think it's part of like a growth mindset thing, but also I've come to discover through introspection and inner work that it is more, that probably most people don't do that is because they believe the story that the brain is telling them. So for instance, if I say something and I'm probably wrong, and you say, "Hey Daniel, you're wrong," my brain automatically, out of survival, said, "Oh, that means that I'm less than. Now I'm going to be outcasted. Now I'm not enough for this person." And from an evolutionary standpoint, being outcasted or being less than meant death, right? You needed your tribe to survive. But the funny thing is, it's just paradoxically, when you accept, when you recognize, "Hey, sure, I was wrong. Thank you, Ramona, for pointing that out and for teaching me something new. I learn something new every day," your perception of me automatically goes up. But if I fight you and say, "No, no, no, you're wrong, I'm not wrong," then your perception of me automatically goes down. So us thinking that by being wrong, the perception that people have of us is going to decrease, it actually increases if we are willing to accept it. And to me, that is fascinating. And I've been trying to help a few friends of mine. Can you trick your brain to see it from this point of view? And if you want to be seen as somebody, I don't know, I would say somebody with more status or somebody more confident or someone who who is more enlightened, if you want to call it that way, and then accept that you were wrong. And people are going to look up to you because, as you said, Ramona, very, very few people are willing to accept and recognize that they were wrong. But going back to the curiosity, and I just wonder if you have done this or if you train people to do this. One thing that what have come to me to understanding myself better and to figure out how to deal with my own emotion has been decoding the emotions, or actually decoding the feelings, because the emotions are clear: fear, sadness, anxiety, happiness, anger. But to me, the feelings are the stories behind those emotions. So we sort of, in our body, we feel and we sort of know what they mean, but it is so vague that we don't even have the language to challenge it. Okay, what is my body trying to tell me? What's the information that my body is telling me right now? Because even if I say, for instance, I could say, "Oh, I felt so anxious about having a conversation with Ramona on the podcast." Okay, why? Well, maybe because maybe I feel that I won't be enough, or maybe I won't be as a good a conversation. Maybe she will think that the podcast is not good enough. Whatever the story might be. So, okay, is that true? Kind of find a way to challenge that and slowly dissolve the story and implement a new one. And I think that maybe we overreact to to our emotions and feelings. We have a knee-jerk reaction instead of trying to step back, as you said, being curious and ask ourselves, okay, why am I feeling this way? What's my body trying to tell me, and can I do anything about it? Have you have you done anything like this? Are there other techniques that people can start using to understand themselves better?
Hmm. So I have done a few things around that, but my first
Mhm,
question would be, let's assume I did think this podcast is, not what I thought it was.
mhm, mhm.
Why would that say anything about you as a person?
Yes, it wouldn't. Well, so here's the thing. I put that as an example because when I start when I launched the podcast at the beginning, for the first 2 or 3 months, I felt maybe imposter syndrome, maybe that couldn't have good conversations because, and I've shared this on the podcast in the past, that prior to the podcast, I was shy, introverted, and highly socially anxious. But for whatever reason, I follow my intuition. Say, I think that I should follow this path. And for the first 2-3 months of the podcast, I felt very, very anxious at the beginning. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to connect with the person. Maybe I'm wasting their time and it's all on me. And what I've done for the last year and a half, now it's just easy. Now I'm excited to even have a conversation with anybody, because when I choose, when I pick guests, there's something that draws me to them. And for me, I think that in the past used to be, well, this will confirm that I'm not a person worth having a conversation with, which was a childhood story, because I always felt as an outsider and it was hard for me to connect with people. Ironically, the podcast was completely the opposite. I was able to connect with like-minded people. And those early experiences with people that I could connect at a deeper level, I could have very interesting conversation, gave me the confidence that, oh, I was just in the wrong group of people back then. So the story would, if I were going to answer to the question, because I went on a tangent, I would say that back then the story was probably, I'm not doing the right thing, therefore I'm not good enough for people to even have a conversation with me. I think that was the story back then.
Hmm. And I think that's the interesting part, because of course you can unravel all the stories that you tell yourself. And at the same time, I think it's also a question of what is your circle of control, what is really your responsibility, right? Because what I think of this podcast is not your responsibility. Because what I think of the podcast most likely says more about me than it says about you as a person. And even if I did think that the podcast was no good, which by the way I don't,
Thank you.
then that would still not reduce the value of you as a person, right? And this is, I think, connects very much to also something that I said before, right? What we need to be willing to see is not only that the other person is okay as they are, even if they have a different perspective and opinion, but we also need to know that we are okay, even if we have a different opinion and might even be wrong, right, with something that we say, think, or whatever. And I think this assumption that every human being is just okay as they are through their existence, basically, right? This very in-depth belief is something that I think is important to cultivate for emotional intelligence. Because if I know that I'm okay as I am, even if I do not prove myself every day through being the best in everything that I do, then only then can I also take the step back to really see also others in their journey and where they are also maybe struggling, right? Because if I'm in a bad place, let's say, for example, in this podcast now, if I felt like, oh, I need to give the perfect answers, and if I do not speak the perfect English and whatnot, right? Only then will I be worth of being on this podcast, for example. Then how can I, in that state, even connect with you? Because then all I would do would be in my head and think about what I need to do in order to prove myself. And that also, for me at least, depends on day to day, right? If I'm, for example, sick, if I have a cold, it's a lot harder to be fully okay with who I am as I am at that point in time, right? But I think, yeah, nourishing a sense of self-worth or being okay just by existing is something that is really important. And there, I think what's good is doing the inner work that you have also already shared that you're doing, and looking into the stories that you're telling yourself, the beliefs that you have. And I think I'm not good enough, right? This is also something that Brené Brown very often brings up. By the way, huge recommendation, still a huge fan of her work. I think this is something that is also very frequently existent in people's belief system, because at least I also grew up in a society where you had to achieve something to be worth something, kind of, right? And you don't have to achieve anything. You're worth something just by simply existing.
Hmm. I I love the question that you asked me, because even though mine was a hypothetical example, what you said about what you thought about the podcast wasn't on me at all, and it wasn't a reflection of what I was doing right or wrong, but it was a reflection of your inner world. I think that people can and should see that example any day in life. Or if I'm trying to date a new person, or if I'm trying to build a new friendship, if I'm trying to date a new girl and I feel or I get rejected by it, or if I'm trying to create a new friendship and I feel rejected by them, our brain automatically feels and thinks we're not enough. It's all on me. I did something wrong. There's something broken within me, rather than, hey, maybe there was not. I mean, hey, I don't like half of the people probably, because not everyone is your cup of tea. So you're going to find people that are mismatched, and that's okay. And I feel that if we remind ourselves of that, of, okay, they might not like me, I'll find my own people. And it takes time. I think I just, as a muscle, we need to just work on that muscle and become aware that, yes, I'm feeling rejection. I'm feeling like I'm going to die. I'm feeling that I'm worthless. I'm feeling all of this. And yet, is that true? Do I want to be with someone, or do I want to be friends with someone that has a different worldview, or has different values or belief, just because in my head being associated with those people mean I'm worth it? So I love that question, because even though maybe a lot of people might not be able to relate to the podcast per se because they don't have a podcast, but they can apply that same example to any aspect of their lives. Because as you said, and this is a topic that I've discussed quite a bit on the podcast, is feeling not good enough. Is a sense of unworthiness, and that is almost like every single human have experienced that at some point. And getting out of it is kind of is not as easy. The reframe I've used is, hey, I'm going to take an action, and I'm going to be okay regardless of the outcome. Now, easier said than done, because we focus a lot of on yeah, we focus a lot of on outcomes. If something didn't go right, well, probably I did something wrong. So once again, I love that, and I do believe, because I've asked a few people that whether they are emotional intelligent or not. I ask them their opinions about whether it is a skill that you can teach or something innate. And most of them have said, no, no, that is something innate, because I haven't met somebody who has sort of trained their emotional intelligence. And probably they're maybe somewhat right, that some people have more are more talented at developing that, just as any talent, any skills. But I remember you mentioning on your TEDx talk that emotional intelligence is not a skill. I mean, it's a skill, not a personality trait. What do you think is important to people to know, that they can develop that emotional intelligence? In fact, that their likelihood of success, whether it's at work, in relationship, or even their own happiness, it is very tied up to how emotionally intelligent they are.
Mm. So first of all, maybe something where I would disagree is I don't think that people necessarily are more talented. I think that people grow up in different circumstances, and of course, some people maybe also, but as to my knowledge, there has not been thorough research done on that in terms of like if you already are born with a certain level also of resilience, right? But if you grow up in a family where you are loved, where you are feeling secure, where you have everything that you need, and then also in the most formative years of your life, um, you get to learn and experience also through your environment and your community that you are good enough as you are. And there, I also don't want to say, right, that you cannot get out of a loving family with also having this, I'm not good enough, because sometimes also, you know, our parents do the best that they can. And sometimes the message that they send unconsciously can also maybe not be ideal for how we grow up as well, right? Because I think it's great, for example, if then kids are being pushed towards their strengths and to get to develop that. But then if you tell them a narrative continuously about how intelligent they are, this still might be creating a feeling of, oh, I'm only good enough if I show that I'm intelligent, for example, right? So um, and I think that if you grow up in an environment where there's a lot the message, no matter whether you do something right or wrong, whether you're intelligent or not, whether you're creative or not, you're still good as a person, as who you are, then of course you're much better set up to have emotional intelligence than someone who's not, right? So I think it's also a matter of like, how do we consciously also think about how we bring up our kids. And this is, I think, where we can easily start, right? What's the narrative that we tell to our kids? And then, even if you think about it consciously, like, you will have missteps, and you cannot do anything, like, you cannot do everything 100% perfectly there, right? It's just trying your best. And then I think if you want to develop that trait, it's really about, first of all, understanding what you talked about with your inner work, right? Understanding what are the beliefs that you carry around with yourself. And there, I would encourage everyone to think about not only the negative beliefs, like I'm not enough, but also think about what are positive beliefs. Because, for example, I would say that I'm an intelligent person. That can, though, also be a hindrance if then something happens where I'm proven wrong, for example, because it might give me the impression that within my identity as an intelligent person, I'm not that anymore, right? And then this kind of could also unscrew what I see, or how I see myself, and what I see my identity to be. So really looking at all the different aspects and facets that I bring to the table, understanding that I can grow in every little bit. And I think what you said there, right? Going to the direction of a growth mindset, understanding that, hey, if I'm wrong now, doesn't mean that I have to be wrong in the future, right? Because I can change my opinion, I can learn more, I can train to get somewhere. And I think this is the same with emotional intelligence, right? If you're realizing, hey, I have issues with anger management, for example, then it's also the question of, what does this anger tell you, right? Because usually anger is there to also ensure that you set good boundaries with others. How have your boundaries been treated before? How do you treat your own boundaries, right? Are you overstepping your own boundaries as well regularly? And then also maybe looking at, is this anger really anger? Or is that anger maybe just a learned behavior because I was not allowed to show a different type of emotion, right? Because maybe I'm angry, but actually I'm sad. Or maybe I'm sad, but actually I'm afraid. And I think that requires, again, inner work. It requires, I personally would recommend to also look out, find coaches, for example, discuss also with friends, right? Hey, this in this situation, how would you feel in that situation? To kind of, because sometimes also friends can have a feeling like, oh, the emotion that my friend is now exhibiting does not seem to really match to the situation that they're explaining right now, right? So if, for example, someone says, hey, I was rejected, if we take the example that you said before, and someone is like, I'm so angry because I was rejected, then maybe they feel a dissonance with that. and they feel like, okay, I would be sad in that situation. And that way you can also kind of understand where do you maybe have like certain coping strategies on an emotional level. And only if you understand what the real emotion is that you have can you then start dealing with it, right? And then it's also a bit of a trial and error principle, right? Because not everyone handles anger the same way. I like sports for that. Other people might need to go into the forest and scream for a while. Other people might just need to turn on loud music. There are tons of ways on how to deal then with the emotion. Sometimes also appropriate, if you're angry, to think about where does this anger stem from and then leave it where it came from, right? Because if someone really oversteps my boundary, then sometimes it's important to use the energy from the anger to go up to that person and say, hey, you overstepped a boundary there for me. And I would really appreciate if you don't do that in the future anymore.
There's several threads I can pull from because I love everything that you just said now, and my brain was all over the place. I'm gonna put self-awareness here in a box. I'll come back to it in a minute. The first one, I've been obsessed with identity lately, and as you said, if my identity is that I'm intelligent and someone tells me that I'm wrong, that threats my identity. And we fail to realize or to see or to think that they're not mutually exclusive. They can both coexist. Hey, I can be very, very smart and yet be wrong in some areas of my life. And I think that I believe that people are caught up in these identity loops that they cannot break free from those because basically they are at a very unconscious level. And until they bring it back to conscious and shed a light onto, okay, what is a person I'm performing for? And by that I mean I'm performing for myself. If I believe I'm angry at them, or as you said, if I have anger management issues, then I'm going to behave that way because that's my identity. I've always had anger management issues, so I'm always going to be angry. Well, you don't have to be. That is the person you are for yourself, because changing that identity, it is unsafe for your nervous system because we've always been this way. So I love that how people can start, maybe I'm not, maybe I don't have anger management, maybe I'm not an extremely anxious person who I used to be very anxious all the time, my dad as well. And the more I understood the brain, the more I understood neuroscience, the more I understood psychology. Wait, a lot of these things is in my control. I can change the narrative and the identity behind it.
And
Uh-huh.
maybe
Yeah.
if I just may break in here, it's also a question of like, what was it good for at some point, right? Because maybe at some point, being anxious in your life was a good coping mechanism for a reality that you were facing. Could also be, right? Maybe it's also just learned from, if from your parents, for example. And then it's also a question: does that still serve you, this coping strategy, right? Because if we take again the example of anger management, right? Maybe as a child, it was really important to be angry because otherwise your boundaries were continuously overstepped. Is that still the case when you're now an adult? Or are you just falling back kind of in your childhood memory and reliving the situation where that was good? And now you could exhibit other strategies that might be way more fruitful because your environment changed and you're an adult now and you can deal with things differently. Because as a kid, it's very difficult to be so sophisticated and eloquent if you're, I don't know, 6 years old. Very unlikely, I would assume, that you go up to your parents and say, hey, mommy, that was not really nice and that overstepped this and this boundary, and it would be really great if next time we can do it differently, right? This is something that I
Yeah.
cannot expect of a 6-year-old
No.
child, but it's something that if you're, I don't know, 26, 36, 46 or so, you can do that. And then that is a valid different way rather than becoming just angry. So sometimes it's important to see, hey, that was good for me at some point appreciate also that it was good for you at some point, to be able to let go of it and then see, now I'm an adult and I can decide to behave differently.
I love that you mentioned that because that's something that I've applied into my life. Because some of the behaviors that we might experience or that we might show make no sense to the situation. And that's because that's our inner child, that's our 5-year-old self, a 10-year-old self that use that as a survival mechanism. The children's brains are so fascinating because they will do anything to guarantee safety. So I will have to adapt and mold to my environment. But that comes with the stories that are created that then are not changed because a lot of, if not every single story, was planted there without our consent. Our brain just created a story. This is what this means. Now we're going to live our life like this. And it's like, as you said, understanding that, hey, that helped me in the past. I'm thankful for it. But now I'm much wiser. I'm much more grounded. I don't need it anymore. But I shouldn't feel ashamed of that, which takes me to the anger point that I feel that a lot of men have a lot of anger because whether they feel sadness or fear, there is a shame around it because they shouldn't feel that way. Because if they're man enough or they're manly enough, they shouldn't feel any fear or sadness, and that shame ends up creating anger towards themselves for feeling that way, and toward a society for make them feel that way, without understanding that emotions are not who we are. It's just an experience we have to go through. It's just part of the human
Human experience. Yeah.
bingo. Bingo. So I think that people would have a better time with themselves and in society if they understood, hey, I don't have to feel ashamed of wanting to cry now for whatever reason. Because maybe if I want to cry now, and I've done it in the past, whatever, 2 months, is probably I'm releasing something from 10, 15, 20 years ago, uh, that I finally allow my body enough safety to just release that emotion. And once that emotion is gone, then I'm a much better place, but I don't attach shame to that. And going back to the point I put over here about self-awareness, is I think is very related and tied up to emotional intelligence. I've talked to people and they said, "Oh, I'm very self-aware because I believe that one of the keys to become more emotional intelligent, as you said, one is curiosity and the second one is self-awareness." But I think people have misconception of what self-awareness is. I ask them, okay, so why do you say that you're self-aware? And they go and list every bad thing about them, all the bad things. Oh, because I'm this and that, whatever, all the negative things. And then I ask, okay, what are the positive ones? Well, two or three, but they're not much. It's like, no, you're a self-hater masked as self-aware. You're just doing the same job that any hater will do, would point out all the negative things about someone and will diminish any of the positive things. Self-awareness means that you have to bring both. I mean, you're also aware of the all amazing and positive things that you have about yourself. Doesn't matter how small they are, you have to realize, because if you focus all on the negative things, then you're gonna be trapped in that loop of, yeah, I'm only focused on what I'm lacking or what I'm not good at, and when I diminish all the good things, then of course I'm gonna be miserable. Of course I'm always gonna be angry. Of course I'm always gonna be afraid. Of course I'm always gonna be sad because I'm where my attention is all on the negative things. What have you found with the people you coach or even yourself, how people treat self-awareness, and is there any dissonance between what they believe self-awareness is and what they're actually doing?
Mm. So I would say that if I ask someone if they're self-aware and they say yes, very much so, then most of the time that is a good indication that it's actually a no. I
No.
sometimes like to ask the question, like on a scale from 1 to 10, how self-aware would you put yourself? And I think that the people who are most self-aware tend to be around the mid of the scale, right? That's why I had to smile when you were sharing this. So yeah. I totally relate to that, because for me, that's not self-awareness, because in the end, that's just feeding into your own negative belief system. And that means that you're not aware of where your beliefs come from and how to actually deal with that, right? Um, I think that in general, self-awareness, what you shared, is quite relevant and a good first step. What am I good at, but also what am I bad at? Understanding where that comes from. And I think for me, then the next step would also be, and how do I affect my environment? Because putting self-awareness at only something intrinsic, I think, does not necessarily fit into our society. We are social beings, right? We do not live in isolation. We live in a wider sense. And what we do, how we behave, what we say, will affect other people. And I have met also people who were relatively self-aware when it came to their own strengths and weaknesses, and were fairly good also at managing their own emotions. Um, but then they were not really aware of how their behavior affected others around them. And for me, that then also means that there is still quite a lot of room for improvement, because in the end, mm, whether you want it or not, you have a certain level of connection to other people. And then I think it's also good to understand, if I say A, how does that affect other people in my environment, right? And I think they're learning to realize what consequences behaviors and actions and what you say has in the world, is also something that you should factor in there. And when I think, when coaching people, this is anyways always something that you work on, right? Because in the end, when you coach people, very often they come with a very, let's say, on the surface looking relatively simple problem. But mostly people come into coaching when they've already tried a couple of strategies and were not successful. And then the question is, why have their current strategies not been successful? And then it's about expanding their worldview, expanding their knowledge of other strategies that they could apply, and then also understanding the system that they're within, right? Because also there, if you have a challenge that you want to overcome, then it's important from a systemic point of view to look at, like, what's your setup? Because not everything is solely about you, then something can also be affected by your environment. And then it's also, again, a question of, how do you deal with that? What are the consequences of the different options that you have? And what is then the consequence and the outcome that you can live with the best? If I take an example, right, sometimes you have people in coaching that are not certain where they want to go with their career. And maybe they're even unhappy in the situation they're in right now. And then what's usually very helpful is just to discuss with them what it is that makes them unhappy, if they are unhappy, what the options are that they see, and then understand what are the blockers that keeps them from moving forward into that direction. And then very often you will come across, of course, individual belief systems as well. I'm not good enough for this position. I still need to learn this and that. And then it's also finding out what that person would need in order to feel like they can do that next step, can take that next step. And then also see what are the consequences if they stay within the current situation, right? Because in the end, maybe what they have to kind of pay, I want to say, in order to get where they want to go is too high a price to pay. And then they realize, oh, actually, maybe the situation I'm in is also not that bad. Because in the end, there is always a price to pay. Sometimes it's easier to just look at the short term, right? Oh, it's so much hassle to apply for a new job. ooh, what if I don't feel well during that? And then it's also good to take a look at the long-term pain. If you're in a role, for example, where you've outgrown that role and you need yourself to move on to develop further, then this pain will stack up. And then it's also good to maybe go through the higher short-term pain, similar with relationships, right? Sometimes you need to ask yourself, is the pain of leaving a relationship higher than the long-term pain if you're not happy in that relationship?
Yeah, that last one is kind of tricky. Well, actually, even the one in the career, because you have, whether that's good or bad, you have the sunk cost fallacy. I've already invested so much here. Now it's just, am I willing to lose years, money, time, effort, whatever the case may be, for a potential better future? But our nervous system doesn't know whether it's a better future, even if we rationally and consciously know that is for a better future, whether I want to advance in my career, I've outgrown who I am, or this relationship no longer serves me, is the fact that, well, our nervous system is wired for familiarity, and stepping out of that familiar space, stepping into the unknown, into the uncertainty, can be terrifying unless we do a lot of reframing. And what I've done, at least for myself, is finding ways to work with my nervous system rather than against it. Because I know I tried for many years trying to work against it while knuckle my way through life, and it's like, no, I can't beat my nervous system. I just can't. Right? Eventually, I'll lose. So I think it's cool that you mentioned that, because even people are at the very edge of expansion, or even leaving a relationship that they are not happy with, is the fear I'm feeling right now. It is okay. It is normal. It's part of my brain trying to keep me safe. Because at the end of the day, our brains are not wired to help us thrive or to make us happy, but to keep us in safety, even if that safety means in a toxic or a small position, I should say. Mhm.
Yeah. And then I think it's also a question about what are your other resources, right? Because if you're in a relationship, for example, that is toxic, then the question is, what about your family? What about your friends? What about also other options that you have where you have a certain level of social connection as well, that can be there for you in order also to make that fall a little less of a strong blow, right, for you. And the same also with a new job, for example, right? What are other things that you might want to look at, like your strengths in terms of the job as well, and other aspects of your life that would support you going through that change? Because yes, change sometimes can be painful, right? And I would also say that there can be so much as too much change, because if, let's say, you go out of a relationship, then you have to move to a completely new city, you start a new job, everything is new, right? Then you need to be very secure in yourself to handle all of that. Versus if, for example, you feel like, hey, I'm stuck in a certain place in my life where I'm not happy, then taking a really thorough look at what are the pieces that make me unhappy, and then take it on a step-by-step basis, right? Because if you break it down into smaller steps and then look at also all the good things that you have, and I'm very certain that everyone has something that is also good, right? Whether that is within themselves or out in the world somewhere with friends or experiences that they love, hobbies that they have, right? Um, then it's easier to go down that path, right? Because yes, you're totally right. There is a difference between stepping out of your comfort zone into your learning zone and stepping then from your learning zone into your panic zone. And in a panic zone, no learning and no development is possible then anymore, because your nervous system is so overwhelmed. And no, you cannot cheat your nervous system. If you're in a panic, that's no fun.
I
So
tried.
the question, I
Doesn't
can
work.
imagine. Yeah, and then I mean the question is, okay, if you want to take that step and it's getting you in your panic zone, okay, what are things that you can do so that step will only put you in a learning zone? Like, what's the smallest step that you can take towards that direction? that will put you out of your comfort zone into your learning zone, but without the panic zone? Or is there something that can support you in taking that step that would prevent you also from going into a panic zone, right? If you're, I don't know, afraid to have a salary conversation with your manager, puts you in a panic mode, right? What can you do to make it easier? Maybe role play it with a friend, role play it with someone who has a managerial position in a different part of the organization, right? Someone that you know, where you can just also ask, learn more about like what's really realistic to ask for example, right? Stuff like that. If it's, hey, this or that is not ideal, I need to have a very difficult conversation with a friend. Maybe you can talk to someone else before, prepare yourself. Like, what do you want to say? How do you want to say it? And how can you make that less of a big step for you in that moment?
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. And I would add, based on my own experience, that even when you take those steps, sometimes we'll feel embarrassingly small, that almost like, okay, anybody can do it. And even though it's hard for me, we'll have self compassion and understanding that it's okay. And after you take that step, say, hey, regulate your nervous system. Use language to say, hey, we did it. We are safe. We're okay. And that will train your nervous system to be okay with this expansion or learning zone that you describe. And I think that one more thing I would add to that is, I guess, the definition that has helped me about trusting ourselves. To me, I used to feel or believe that trusting myself was n- knowing everything or knowing every step. But then I came to realize that trusting myself is having the ability to figure it out as I go. I might not have all the steps. I might not have all the answers. I might not know exactly what step 5 or step 10 or 15 might look like. But do I trust myself to figure out step 1 and 2 and go on from there? Because if we want, because obviously we want predictability, we want to have all the answers before we take that step, we take that action, we take that leap. But that's impossible. We won't have all the answers, but we will just figure it out again as I go. I mean, as we go. Ramona, I wish we could have more time. I love this conversation. I'm in the middle of like, I want to ask more questions, but we are running out of time. But as a closing question, what's one uncomfortable truth about emotional intelligence that most people resist but absolutely need to hear?
I think what I said in the beginning, sometimes it's painful, right? Because you have to sit with your emotions. And that is a very uncomfortable truth. Like, if you're very sad, if you're very, very afraid of something, being with yourself in that moment and not trying to push those feelings away can be very painful, particularly in the beginning. And yet, I think it's the best thing that you can do for your own good.
I love that. It's almost like a full circle, and it's almost like, yes, the only way out is through, as they say. You have to go through the motion. You have to. It's funny because you hear that emotions only last, I don't know, between 90 seconds and maybe 5 minutes, and once you let it go, I mean, go through your body, then you should be good. It's the stories and the rumination that keep you in that deregulated nervous system constantly, just because instead of you, it's funny because we are the only animals that stay here. Most animals will just go fight or flight for the period of time. Once they're safe, once they're in safety, they're just fine, they're good. They don't ruminate, and they don't feel anxiety or fear or anger. They're just like, okay, we're good. But us, we overthink maybe too much. I used to be one of those. I'm trying to get better at it, but it is what it is. Ramona, where can people find you, connect with you, know more about your work?
So at the moment, easiest is via LinkedIn, I would say. You can just follow me, send a connection request. I do have a website, but it's not very well maintained at the moment because I'm not the biggest fan of that. But if there is anything that people are curious to know, or if they want support through coaching, for example, of course, also virtually possible, then they can just chat with me on LinkedIn and we can set up all that is surrounding what they need.
Awesome. And I also recommend anybody to listen to your TEDx talk. Is very insightful, and it has a lot of value in terms of understanding emotional intelligence and the steps that we can take to develop more emotional intelligence. So, Ramona, was an absolute pleasure having you on. I have to bring you back at some point because I really love and enjoy the conversation, and I feel that we just scratch the surface. We can go far deep and understanding more, and maybe explore topics that could help others become more aware, more emotional intelligence, and maybe change society as a whole by everyone being more grounded. So thank you.
Thank you as well. It was a pleasure talking to you. And yeah, if you want to have another conversation, let's do that.
Awesome.